Hey everyone, welcome to LearnDax channel. My name is Desh and in the previous video we had calculated the bi-monthly rolling sales amount. Now if you haven't watched that video, I will leave the link in the description. You can go and check it out. In this particular video, we are going to study how a row context works in case of a SUMX function. Now while I have already created a video on row context, filter context and context transition, I felt that if I'm able to plug in the concept of row context using SUMX in this video series, it is going to be much easier for the viewers to understand how these pieces are being knit together as opposed to going back to that video and then coming back here and try to put those pieces together. So we are building up to learning first the row context, then the filter context and context transition. Context transition is a very important concept in Power BI and it's asked in a lot of interview questions. So hopefully I will be able to explain that in a very simple and lucid manner. So without further ado, let's get started and understand how a row context would work in case of a SUMX function. So in order to do that, I have created this small little Excel sheet in which I have this particular formula which indicates, okay, the arrow size is too big. I'll need to bring it down a bit. Okay, so this is the formula that I have used, wherein the first argument is the table and the second argument is the unit sold column. So this is the sales table essentially. Okay, not the arrow. I wanted a rectangle. Yeah, apologies for that. So this is essentially the sales table, and we are referencing this sales table in here, and this is the unit sold column which we are referencing in here. So when I say that I want to calculate the sum x of the units sold, I essentially want to aggregate this particular column. Now I have kept this note in here which explains what sum x does. So sum x iterates row by row over the sales table, which means like I mentioned here, iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3, iteration 4. So it's iterating row by row. And then in each row, it evaluates the sales unit sold and adds them all up. And here the row context is created by SUMX, one row at a time is active. Now this is the most important line in this whole explanation. The fact that the row context is created by SUMX. Now what row context is essentially when you write this formula, then it should know which row to look up to when it's going to iterate over the table. And that's exactly what row context is. That if I am asking SUMX to calculate the unit sold, the sum of units sold, then it has to start from row 1, then row 2, then row 3, then row 4. This is what row context means. It's as simple as that. Now, the way it's going to calculate is if I just write here, I'm going to use an Excel formula is equal to, I'll write, or what I can do is I can actually calculate the product of units sold into sales price. If I just modify this formula a little bit so that it makes more sense, I will multiply it by sales and sales price. So we get a more clearer picture. Okay, so now this is going to be the product of these two particular values. So I'll just write is equal to this into this. If I hit enter, this is what I get. So SUMX is going to go row by row and calculate these values. So if I bring this right up to here, this is the autofill feature of Excel wherein you just, click at the bottom corner and then drag it, and then it is going to give us the values. Now, an interesting thing here is in the absence of a filter context, the SUMX is going to give us the value as the sum total of, if I just sum all of this, it is going to give us 37,100. Now, if you want to see the demonstration of that, let's go back to the Excel sheet. Now, how the filter context works and how the row context works is going to be my next part of the explanation. So I just mentioned right now that in case of any filter context, SUMX is going to give us this output. Whereas in case of any filter context which is applied at the table level, the output is going to be split in this particular way. Now, if I go back to the Excel sheet or the Power BI, and let's say I create this new page, and I have the sales amount measure already, right? If I go back to this, see, this measure is my sales amount, which is sales price into units sold. So this is exactly what I did here, right? In Excel sheet. The formula is the units sold into sales price. Now I go back to Power BI. If I drag the sales amount and if I convert it into a card, so it's giving me 1.2 billion, which is what? 37,100. Whereas if I drag this SumX measure in the context, mind this very important word, in the context of any of these particular columns, be it sale ID, sale date, product, unit sold, then the calculation is going to get happen in that particular context. And that is what filter context is. But right now, don't focus on what filter context is. I'm just giving a brief of what filter context is. Now I'll go back to Power BI and I will drag, let's say, oh, I think region is something which doesn't occur as often. Yeah. So if I drag the same sales amount measure, okay, I'm not mentioning that split the sales amount in terms of the region. I'll just drag it here and this is what we get. So if I put it very plainly, the row context is essentially a guide which tells SumX when it is going to take this table that how it has to iterate row over row. That is row context. The row context iterates, as simple as that. The filter context filters and the row context iterates. Row context is a very simple concept. It's actually not even a something that is difficult to understand. Row context is essentially if I have a table and if I'm writing a sum x measure or any aggregator function, then the only thing that's happening is it is iterating row by row. And what is filter context is what we're going to take a look at very deeply in the next video. So if I go back to the Power BI, and like I said that here the filter context is active, which is why this value, which is 1.2 billion, is being split into, I think this is 16 million, this is 25 million, this is another 20 million. So when this value is getting split in all of these values, this is because there is a filter context active when I am pulling that same measure in case of the region as the context. If I pull the very same measure in the let's say state, let's say I pull the same measure, I think this would go as a map. I'll change it to a table. If it comes in the context of a table, and if I pull the very same sales amount, it is going to give me a different output because the filter context is active in this case. And here, when I am calculating the sales amount, the row context is active. Whereas when I'm bringing that same sales amount measure in the table, the filter context is active. Now, this might seem a little confusing, but again, the row context is a very simple concept. It is just an indication to the aggregator function that this is the table and you have to iterate row by row. That's it. That's nothing much difficult about it. So I hope I have tried to simplify what row context means, which is essentially just telling the measure or the function where to look for the values and how to iterate. I hope you found this video useful. Uh, if you found any value from this video, please share it with your friends. And yeah, thanks for watching and happy learning.